the Sinner and Alcaraz men's final. I want to speak about that, but I also want to kind of place it in the pantheon of men's singles slam finals.
As I watched it unfold, and by the time we got to 5-all in the fifth, I felt like I knew we were witnessing an epic. And the other one that I would put behind Sinner and Alcaraz, and I wouldn't believe I would say it, would be the two that definitely top it, but by the slimmest of margins.
Ready? Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, as it is on the east coast of the US, where Steve Flink is. And do not adjust your sets. It is Steve Flink rejoining me about 10, 11, 12 days since we last spoke. Normally, I sort of save Steve. I wrap him up in cotton wool and bring him out for the slams. And we're actually sandwiched right in between a couple of slams right now. But I'm bringing him back out because I sent him an email a week ago, just over a week ago, saying, Steve, we have to talk. And it's just because of what I just witnessed in terms of the Sinner and Alcaraz men's final. I want to speak about that, but I also want to kind of place it in the pantheon of men's singles slam finals. So, Steve, first of all, I know it's 10 days later, but immediate reflections on what you just witnessed when we saw that Alcaraz-Sinner final.
No, it's still mind-boggling to me. I mean, as I watched it unfold, and by the time we got to 5-all in the fifth, I felt like I knew we were witnessing an epic, and I wanted to see how it would eventually end. And then I did a lot of reflecting since, and it has to be. I mean, you could argue it's one of the top 5 matches of all time, going back to the Tilden era. It's certainly one, in my view, one of the 5 best of the Open era. Looking at Grand Slam finals, looking at even the WCT finals in Dallas, which was a very important event in '72, where Rosewall beat Laver in a 5th set tiebreak.
In the finale of the 5th set, unbelievably even. A blistering backhand return down the line. The shot heard round the tennis world. And now it's Ken who needs just one more. Only 2 points difference between these two tennis immortals after playing for 3 hours and 45 minutes.
I'm just about out of breath. We're just about all out of time. I'm very happy about winning. I'm sorry that there can't be 2 winners too.
Ken Rosewall, age 37, for the 2nd consecutive year, the world champion of tennis.
And at that point, Dallas had huge significance because the players went there. They played from January to May just to qualify, and it was a title they all badly wanted to win. And so I put that one up there too. So I have to say, I mean, to me, the two that definitely top it, but by the slimmest of margins, are Nadal, Federer, 08 Wimbledon, Borg, McEnroe, 1980 Wimbledon. Then, then it becomes, then the question is where to place, as I mentioned, Laver, Rosewall, that's the only one outside the slam, where to place Federer, Djokovic, 2019 Wimbledon, the historic implications, the level of play they sustained for 5 hours, going to 12-all in the fifth and deciding it in a tiebreak won by Djokovic, so he wins at 13-12 in the fifth. And the other one that I would put behind Sinner and Alcaraz, and I wouldn't believe I would say it, would be Nadal and Djokovic in Australia, the 5-hour, 53-minute blockbuster final, high quality skirmish, the Australian Open final 2012. So I'm putting it right in there.
What did this match have that makes it, just for some people that are sort of not quite sure where to place it? I saw various lists coming out within hours of it finishing of where they would place it in the sort of best men's singles finals of all time. And some of them were obviously lots of people getting involved, lots of people agreeing and disagreeing. It's such a subjective, conversation that's fine. A lot of these lists appear, and I'll come back to this point later, they appear to sort of have a lot of recency bias by throwing in McEnroe, Borg, and then sort of tennis almost not existing again until about the mid 2000s or even late 2000s before, the Federer Nadal sort of era really kicked in. But I'll come back to that later on. What did this match between Sinner and Alcaraz have? What were the ingredients that it has that suddenly elevates it into this kind of conversation?
Well, you start off, they're the two best players in the world. Coming into the final, they've won the previous 5. They've divided those. Going back to the beginning of 24, they won all the slams. They have this emerging rivalry, which we'll see where it all heads, because recently it's been all Alcaraz. That was his 5th win in a row, but that was their first major final. They both rose to the occasion, and it was really 5 awfully high quality sets. I mean, you can't, not much to call. You could say that Carlos was a little bit somewhat in disarray from being up a break in the first set, up 3-2 to going down 5-2 in the second. But then I think the match just took off from there, and it soared. So to me, there's the two best players fighting for a major title. Alcaraz trying to get his 5th, Sinner trying to get his 4th. It just, to me, it had everything, because it had closely contested sets, high quality points, and many fluctuations in fortunes. And they both showed so much character in the process of fighting back, because Alcaraz at a set in 5-2 could have felt pretty gloomy. And instead, he took that set into a tiebreak. He eventually lost it in the tiebreak, but he had his teeth into it a bit. And then Alcaraz could have gotten pretty dismayed early in the third when he's down a break immediately and thought, this just isn't my day. But he comes back, and Sinner fights back at the end of the set after being down the break himself and serving for 5-all, and Alcaraz thwarts him there. And now we have a really fascinating match unfolding. It's 2-1 for Sinner. And then, of course, the 4th set, the 4th and 5th were surpassing. I think they were phenomenal, because Sinner had won 15 out of 16 points on his way to triple match point.
And the moment has arrived. Match point, championship point for Jannik Sinner.
At 5-3 in the 4th, with Carlos serving at love 40. And then Carlos was so composed on the match points, and Sinner was a bit uptight. It's not what I would have necessarily expected. I mean, I always expect Carlos to make you beat him and fight hard and everything, but he's inclined, as you know, John, to go for spectacular shots. He loves to be adventuresome, but he made up his mind in the 3-5 game when he was down triple match point. He said, "No, there's going to be no giveaways. There's going to be no donations. He'll have to beat me here. I'm going to make him beat me here." And Sinner did crack a bit. But the first one was a forced error, because Carlos had a very deep forehand into Sinner's cross-court forehand into the corner that pulled Sinner off the court. And Sinner tried to go deep down the line, not too close to the sideline, hit it long. I'd say that was provoked. But then on the next one, Sinner's got a second serve return. Carlos, having missed a first serve, John, by quite a big margin, but got in a safe kicker to the backhand, and Sinner was looking to kind of attack it. It wasn't necessarily a typical Sinner play. He was looking to almost move in behind it, and he overhit it, hit it long. I mean, that to me was unforced. That was like, he didn't quite have the conviction, and he didn't execute, and he had to make that return. It was a second serve, and it wasn't an extraordinary second serve. It was an okay second serve in my view. And then the third one, when Carlos looped a ball down the middle. Again, a smart play at that stage when you're trying to, again, make Sinner beat you. And Sinner took a high forehand and drove it into the net very surprisingly. So that's how and then Carlos, of course, closed out the game. Then Carlos at that point said, "Okay, you had your chance." An ace and a winner, and he's held. And then, of course, that made Sinner
I want to pause you here, Steve. Just want to pause you, and then I want you to continue. Sorry, if you can remember your train of thought. The 30-40 point that you just brought up, I think in terms of where Jannik is at, I think he might just, either it's fatigue or possibly mental. I think he's starting to worry at 30-40. I think at love 40, you've got 3 chances to
Yeah,
break. You've
right.
got the serve, you've got the break in your pocket as well. You're going to have a chance to serve it out. We often forget about that. Hopefully we touch upon it in a couple of minutes.
Oh,
But,
yeah, absolutely.
he has a chance to serve out. So it's so much insurance there that he can almost those first 2. But I don't know. Obviously, his mother's not feeling the same. I don't know if you remember the images of her in the crowd just panicking at
Yes,
this point.
yes.
But that 30-40 is the one where I just think I always think of this anyway in a match that, you got a break point opportunity if it's 30-40, 15-40, whatever. The love 40 scenario, you're almost a bit chilled at love 40, thinking, I've got 3 chances here. Here we go, especially on clay. And then 15-40, you're like, okay, I need to really focus here because I don't want this to get to 30-40. And when it gets to 30-40, as it did, I don't know. It was the one that was sort of almost most un-Sinner-like.
Good point. I don't disagree with the words you said. I agree because it's getting to you a bit. You're not as relaxed. Love 40, you were still relaxed. 15-40, somewhat relaxed. 30-40, getting uptight.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It was a very un-Sinner-like mistake. How many times is he going to hit that ball into the net? He's going to drive it. He's going cross court, by the way, so it's a safe shot as long as he clears the net. And he didn't really come that close. So, yeah, I agree. It was getting in his head a bit, and Carlos could feel it too. And that may be why Carlos sent that ball down the middle with a high trajectory just to make him think a bit, make him nervous. Who knows? But it was a startling turn of events because I think any of us watching it at love 40, when somebody gets to, let's say Sinner had gotten to 30-40, he hadn't had triple match point, just at 30 all, he plays a great point in his match point. It's a different feeling altogether than triple match point. And so, yes, and then you brought up a good point there, John. So now Sinner goes to the changeover worried, quite apprehensive. He hasn't closed him out. He'd like to believe he can serve it out, but they both know something dramatic has just happened. And that so I don't think Sinner has the feeling he usually does when about to serve for the match. And had he not done that in the let's say the previous game was a routine hold for Carlos, totally different feeling, go to the changer. Maybe Sinner serves it out. We'll never know. But I didn't like the way that Sinner played that next game. Understandably, he was still a little clouded by what had just occurred because I felt like he started off with Carlos gave him a little bit of a looper and he hit a forehand long. He got off on the wrong track to go down love 15. And then again, the break point when he lost that game on a forehand down the line long. Carlos played one really good point in the middle of the game when he came to the net and knocked off a volley. But I felt like overall Sinner had little conviction when he served. It was almost like hope instead of belief at 5-4. Hope instead of belief. Maybe I hope I can get through this game. I think I can get through this game, but no sense of purpose and controlled aggression or any of the things we associate with him normally. So I thought that was under the circumstance, like I said, you say it's understandable. I would say it's understandable because it was such a shocking turn of events. But he did play, for him, a disappointing game. And Carlos, once again, John, nothing too fancy. He played a solid game. I like that as well from his end because he's still one game away from elimination and his opponent serving for the match. So he's not out of the woods yet. And that's how he treated the situation. I liked it. I liked it very much from his end. From Sinner's end, I was a bit surprised he couldn't take hold of events a bit better. And, he's the one serving for the match. So he had to remind himself it's still in his hands, but he didn't play that way. He played like that. There was just too many things swirling around his mind. Now, from there, I was impressed that he then at 5-6 held on. He played a good game at 5-6. So he gets himself into the breaker and he wins the first 2 points. But Carlos was just, so that was a glimmer of hope again, a 2-love in the breaker. But Carlos from that point on, aces, winners, it was so good the rest of the way, almost as good as what he did in the 5th set tiebreak, the 10-pointer. So I'm not going to fault Sinner too much for what happened after 2-love in the tiebreak. I thought that was more about Carlos responding.
One of the things for me, or the thing, Steve, that that elevates this into such a stratosphere is something we've just spent 10 minutes talking about pretty much, is the championship point, saves. I think that takes it into a different stratosphere. I've got right in front of me, I've got every single slam final that went to 5 sets in the modern era, and so that's from 68 onwards, albeit the first Australian Open, I think, is 1969. And don't
Right.
correct me if I'm
Right.
wrong on any of this, but so
No,
basically
that's
we're looking at 25, we're looking at 55, 57 years, I think, something like that, in terms of the modern era. And when it comes to these lists, by the way, that we touched on earlier, this sometimes quirks and sometimes just how things are. I mean, take the Australian Open, for example. Until 2009, so that's 50 years, 50 years, 31, 40 years, my bad. 40 years of tennis. Just 3 went 5 sets. That was the 77 final between Gerolaitis and John Lloyd. Edberg Cash in 87 and Wilander Cash in 88. But before we get into some of those other historical matches that I know you have obviously written about, I really want to explain to our audience as to what sort of, does make this go ahead. So what I've done with this list, because it's, there could be matches happening right now at a local club that are going 5 sets with 2 players just playing the most unbelievable tennis. But unfortunately, that's not on our TV. So that eliminates that. There have been thousands of matches that have gone 5 sets and unbelievable dramas. You've even touched on one that occurred outside of the slams. And of course, we've got the women's tour and the men's tour. And I think the women's tour in terms of slam finals is also an episode of its own. And one day we will give that its due justice. But it's a little bit easier for our minds to just kind of hone in on something and go, you know what? Well, let's do this. Where is this match and why is it elevated into the conversation? And first of all, I did a criteria, which again, I've seen some unbelievable 4-set matches. I'm thinking of Nadal Djokovic semi-final at French Open in 21. And I'm sure you can reel off hundreds of 4-set matches, including in slam finals, that just had an unbelievable level of quality. So that's what this match has as well.
Just a quick one.
Go.
Just a quick one. I want you to continue. The Sampras Agassi quarterfinal at the U.S. Open in 2001. Both of them passed their prime, although Pete did come back and win the title the next year. But they played 4 sets, all tiebreakers, no service breaks. Idyllic evening in Arthur Ashe Stadium, and the best match they ever played from both sides of the net, the best match they ever had against each other. So I throw that's another good example. And that was only a quarterfinal.
Steve, no breaks. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What makes, because normally we'd like to see some drama or some break. I mean, maybe there was plenty of drama, but that's interesting. You highlight a match that didn't have any breaks. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, no breaks, which was surprising, given that Agassi was one of the all-time great returners.
Yeah.
And that you figured Pete's going to break Andre somewhere along the way, and he doesn't. But of course, the level was so high, and you kept anticipating the tie breaks, and that's where most of the drama unfolded, was in the tie breaks, as Agassi was 6-3 down in the first set tiebreak and won it, and that's what made Sampras have to come from behind. But that one was, I think anybody who witnessed it would never forget that clash.
So we've mentioned the quality. We've mentioned the 2 best players in the world. We've mentioned, obviously going 5 sets, as I say, that just makes it a little easier in terms of looking at all these slams, in terms of like Australia having 10 slam finals, 10 Australian Open finals going 5 sets, 11 at the French Open, 16 at Wimbledon, by the way, and 10 in the US. So at least it just makes it a little easier for the clarity of our minds to go, okay, now we've got our list of 40, 50, 60 matches or so, and then we can start to sort of occasionally lose some. And as I'm losing them in terms of these greatest men's slam finals of all time, there's certain parts of the Alcaraz-Sinner match that then come into play. Okay, we've got the 5 sets. It's in that conversation immediately. Secondly, quality and levels. Thirdly, of course, we need drama, and the championship points bring that in. And we've got ebbs and flows, and some of them can easily get forgotten in the midst of those championship point saves. Don't forget, as you said, Alcaraz is down 5-2 in the second, brings it back, and you're thinking, I think he might be the favorite going into this tiebreak. They'd recently played a tiebreak in Rome. Aces is a funny point that somehow Alcaraz just bringing up aces, which he also did at crucial moments in that Rome final a few weeks ago. So we've got some ebbs and flows. We've got the 2 sets down, comeback, if you like. We've also got Sinner, I think, in trouble in the 5th and yet fighting back. So we've got him going up in that 4th set tiebreak. I think you highlighted 2-love. I mean, he also gets to, does he get to 30 all on his serve when he's trying to serve it out in the 4th?
No.
Gets 15-30.
Yeah, 15-30.
15-30.
So,
So we've got, go on.
No, I just want to follow up on your point, and this is why this match went from extraordinary to epic.
Yeah.
Was the 5th set comeback of Sinner, because understandably, John, again, after all that had happened at the end of the 4th, the match points getting away, not serving the match out, little bit of a chance at 2-love in the tiebreak, and now suddenly he has to go out and start serving the 5th set, and he has to be distraught no matter what he wants to talk about. And Yannick very wisely, and I think very sincerely, talked about how he likes to delete sets when they're done. You don't delete that one very easily. You just can't. You're a human being.
Yeah.
You were on the verge of beating Alcaraz, ending the losing streak, winning your first French Open. There was so much on the line that he played not a terribly good game to start the 5th to go down the break, which again, you could perfectly understand. And from that point all the way up to 5-3, you felt like Carlos was in complete control. It seemed to be heading for the logical conclusion was that Carlos was going to win this match 6-4 in the 5th on the strength of that early break, that initial break, because he had one difficult service game and Sinner had a chance to break back, but otherwise Carlos was proceeding with confidence and a certain some caution, but more confidence and cautious optimism is what I would say. He felt like he was in the driver's seat as long as he didn't. But suddenly Sinner plays a nice game on his serve at 3-5 to make Carlos serve it out, and then he played that spectacular point in the next game, getting to that Carlos drop shot and basically hitting a redrop accidentally, more of an accident, I would say, in the sense that all he could do was get to the ball and somehow try to get it back over the net. He had all he could do to reach that ball on the backhand side and scrape it back over the net, and that's what he did. And Carlos was too astonished there was no way he could react to it, and it was a winner for Sinner. And I feel like, I mean, that was one of the other golden moments in the match. And then he breaks him on the next point, and suddenly the tennis now goes to another level again. Yeah. We had so many passages like that in the match, but we would have been happy with a 6-4 in the 5th. Still would have thought it was a great match, but I wouldn't have put it in the category with the Borg McEnroes and Nadal Federers. If it had just, I would have put it in there as a great final. But this surge from Sinner, but this is what was so remarkable, John. Carlos then didn't get that discouraged. He played a pretty good game at 5-all. It was actually, I think Sinner needed 4 game points. He's 40-15. He needed to do it on his 4th game point. He had a forehand down the line winner. It was a well-played game on both sides of the net. So Carlos wasn't sagging at that point. He wasn't feeling sorry for himself that he hadn't served it out, and he made Sinner work, but Sinner got it done. So it's 6-5 for Yannick. Now Yannick's won 3 games in a row, and he gets to 15-30, and that's the match point that I don't think people will talk about as much as they should, because Carlos is serving 15-30, 2 points from defeat now, and if Sinner can win this point, he's back at double match point. Improbably.
It's 5-6, is it?
Yeah, it's 5-6.
Yep.
Carlos 5-6, 15-30. Sinner makes a pretty decent return, and Carlos goes down the line of his backhand, but not anywhere near the sideline. It's closer to the middle of the court. It's like halfway. He didn't want to do anything foolish on this. He wasn't going to be reckless. But he hit it with decent pace, but Sinner was there in plenty of time and went for a cross-court forehand and drove it well long. And again, that was another un-Sinner-like era. And I think he kind of shocked himself. I think he had so much momentum at that point, and the last thing he wants to do is miss a shot like that. He didn't have Didn't mean that he was necessarily going to win the point, but if he keeps it deep and keeps it in the court, and he's pretty much in a neutral position, it would have been pretty fascinating to see what transpired from that moment. Instead, I think Carlos was surprised too. Carlos is back to 30 all, and he gets to 40-30. Nice return from Sinner, back in down the line return winner to make it deuce, but Carlos holds on. Just some fantastic shot making from both in that game. But the one point, the one glaring disappointing point, was the Sinner miss at 15-30, which was in its own way almost as important as the match points, because it's going to give him the chance to be back at double match points. So I thought that one didn't get the attention it deserved, because we were all focused so much more on those monumental match points in the previous set.
Sure.
And then, by the way, John, then let me just add, it's not even worth, there's not much you can say about the final set tiebreak, because it was just a dazzling display from Carlos. We can say that it was a great player rising to a moment, meeting a moment prodigiously, and coming through with one magnificent shot after another. In the 12 points, there may have been 2 Sinner unforced errors, maybe, but that's about it. It was Carlos in full flow.
I tell you how good this match was, and it's not that long ago. I'd forgotten that Carlos was serving for it in the 5th. I knew he was up a break, but I'd forgotten that he was serving for it. That's kind of crazy, but there was just so many other things that happened that's sort of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th on the list. Even that 15-30 point, which is wild in terms of just how close Jannik was to having another, again, that's down the list. And yet normally that would be sort of in the top sort of 2 or 3 memories. There's also a point that I wish I could remember when it was. It was a massive moment in the match. It wasn't when Carlos was saving those championship points, but it was at some other juncture. And there's a point, and I know we say this a lot with Carlos, but I still don't know how he won that point. And I tell you what it is. I think he may even be just inside the baseline. And there's a shot from Jannik that is a winner against pretty much every other human being on the planet. And it's a shot cross court, and it's to, obviously, Carlos being a right-hander. It goes right in the corner.
Yeah.
And somehow Alcaraz gets his racket on it. And again, maybe 1 or 2 players on the tour would get a racket on it, and it would fly off the frame and go into the crowd somewhere. But he doesn't just get his racket on it. I don't think does he turn it into a winner? I'm not sure, but he somehow gets his racket on it, and it flies back with velocity over the net and towards the left-hand corner as we view it on TV, and therefore the right-hand corner as Jannik is now trying to defend it. I don't know if you remember that point.
No, I think what you're talking about is, fascinatingly, is the next point. In other words,
is it at 30 all? Is it at 30 all at 5-6?
30 all.
Yeah.
You're so right. It was a brilliant return from Sinner into the corner that Carlos had no right to get back into play. He made a stab at it with the forehand slice, but an aggressive slice, very deep.
Exactly.
Very deep near the sideline. Sinner was stunned, and then he couldn't do much with it, and Carlos hit a winner on the next shot. But that was remarkable. Maybe Carlos was that extra bit more relaxed than he would have been, knowing that he could have been down 15-4. Whatever the reasons, it was a genius play. And so, listen, in fairness, Carlos himself, as brilliant as he is, and as much of an artist as he is and a shot maker, there would be other instances where he wouldn't pull it off, where even he would miss, but he didn't miss there with the chips on the line. And again, if he misses that, he's still down 30-40 match point. So that was a phenomenal shot from Alcaraz, and that also deserved more attention. But how many points could we discuss? We could probably get to 15, 20 crucial points in the match, but that's the kind of contest it was, where they kept defying belief, both players.
Exactly. Final thing I want to do on this before we start placing it, or in our opinions, and we may well differ on some of them. And of course, you go back a little bit further than I do. I spoke to you about my early Wimbledon memories in the sort of Becker era, especially Becker and Edberg, and then a bit more clarity during the 90s. You go back pretty much all the way to even before the Open era, as I highlighted before, beginning in 68. So that helps as well, because some of the matches we're going to touch upon and where we sort of place this Alcaraz one. You mentioned the 5th set tiebreak, because I think there's an argument, as much as you highlight Carlos's brilliance in that tiebreak. I think, did he win 9 points in a row, which I've seen somewhere suggest that he hasn't done that in like years or somewhere, and I'll have to check that stat later on. But I also thought to myself, as we went into that tiebreak, I mean, I'm with 4 or 5 other people watching it, and I'm thinking, let's see how this tiebreak goes, because if it does go 9-all, even if it's the messiest tennis we've ever seen, suddenly we do start maybe putting it into best match of all time categories. And yet, because it goes to 9-2 in the end before Carlos wins it 10-2, in a way, that just diminishes the argument maybe of putting it in that top 1 conversation. Or what? I mean,
you could argue
the brilliance, so.
Yeah, you could argue that, although I would say because it was, as I mentioned at the outset, I still don't put it at the very top. I put it very close. But I wouldn't necessarily make that argument because it was so much of it was about Alcaraz's artistry and brilliance and the shot making, as opposed to Jannik serves 3 double faults or Jannik makes 7 unforced errors or something along those lines. It was so much Carlos winning it rather than Jannik losing it. But of course, we were a bit deflated because the beauty of the 10-point tiebreak, having to win 10 points, these longer ones, is it does give players more of a chance to come back. But Carlos just rattled off. He reeled off those first 7 points so quickly, and he put Sinner in such a deficit that there was really no way back.
And when I mentioned the 9 points in the row, Steve, I just want to highlight, I think he'd won the previous 2 points at the end of the game and then 7 in the tiebreak.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying when it got to 7-zip in the breaker, I mean, it was just asking too much of Sinner. So obviously fans who were torn about had conflicted feelings about who they wanted to win, or just neutral observers, you knew it was pretty much over. There was no way Carlos was going from, as opposed to Carlos being up 5-2. There's still a decent chance. So you're right. That would have just made it all the more remarkable had we gotten a 10-8 or 11-9 tiebreak. But I feel I don't think that really diminished the match. I don't think that, I wouldn't use that rationale to say therefore it's not the best of all time for that reason, because I guess we were getting spoiled. There were so many twists and turns, fluctuations in fortune, so much stupendous tennis that all we wanted was one more hard-fought, suspenseful, gripping tiebreak that kept us on the edge of their seats until at 9 points all. We just didn't get it.
Does the person who wins the match, as strange as it might sound, does that also change the nature of our reflections? What do I mean? I think aside from this match, because you've got 2, I think Alcaraz was a slight favorite going in, but we've got 2, the 2 best players in the world and this unbelievable rivalry developing. So I don't think, because what I sometimes do is if I see a favorite and an underdog and it's an epic 5-setter, but the favorite wins, like in terms of the sort of more legendary player, it does sort of, for me, diminish a little bit in terms of the legendary nature of the match. If Federer wins a huge 5-setter against Tommy Haas at the French Open, it kind of just goes down a little bit in terms of where if Haas wins that somehow, having been 2 sets up, I think he wasn't he, in that 4th round match in 2009, and that changes the nature. That doesn't come into play here. But what does come into play is if Sinner wins the match, those 3 championship points don't become that big a narrative. So I just wonder if Sinner winning it, let's say he wins it 10-2 in the tiebreak with unbelievable tennis. I still think it's phenomenal when we have this conversation, because we'll be talking about the ebbs and the flows and how did Sinner overcome that mental hurdle. But I still think that there's 1% elevation difference because of those championship point saves from Carlos.
I hear you. I understand that. This one, I think, John, there are some parallels to Nadal, Federer, Wimbledon 08 in the sense that Rafa was the one with the 2-set lead. So he's Sinner in a sense, right? Yeah. And you're thinking he might win this in straight. And it's 3-all up 40 in the third. He can't break Roger. And Roger eventually wins the third in a breaker.
Yeah.
Much to the delight of the fans that wanted a longer match. And then we go to the 4th set, and Rafa goes up 5-2 in the breaker, and he gets very nervous and serves a double that Uncle Tony anticipated. He could see the look on Rafa's face and sensed it coming. And But nonetheless, despite that missed moment, Nadal has the 2 match points later in the tiebreak, and one of them, Roger, spectacular backhand pass down the line, and Roger takes it into a fifth. So now you're wondering, is this whole thing going to get away from Rafa? Is Roger going to complete one of the great comebacks of all time? And Rafa eventually wins 9-7 in the fifth. Sinner almost had that scenario where the match point, because Rafa had not cashed in on 2 match points, but the difference is he eventually wins the match.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And also Borg-McEnroe. Borg against McEnroe is another example where Bjorn is leading 2-1, 5-4, serving at 40-15 in the 4th set, ready to complete a fairly, I don't want to call it routine, just a straightforward 4-set triumph over his biggest rival. And McEnroe comes up with 2 winners, a backhand pass, a drive volley winner, takes it into the infamous tiebreak and saves 5 more match points and wins it 18 points to 16. And that was, of course, that was the centerpiece of that great contest. But then again, once again, it was another example. Borg, like Nadal, regrouped in the 5th. He eventually wins it 8-6 in the 5th. He's down love 30 on his serve early, and then I think lost only 1 more point on his serve the rest of the way, and eventually breaks McEnroe and gets the job done. So in the case of Borg in 80 and Nadal in 2008, they had their match points, did not convert them. It looked like they might well lose in 5, but they didn't. They came through. And it almost played out that way for Sinner, John, in the sense that he had his 3-match triple match point in the 4th, and then he gets within 2 points in the 5th, that 15-30 point and then 30 all, and where he could have taken it back into his hands again and won it there, but he was unable to complete the task. That's the difference in the patterns of those matches. But I still think that it was a very honorable effort from Sinner to make that last surge in the 5th and nearly get the victory in the end. At that point, improbably, because Carlos had control. So there were similarities in those 3 5-set matches.
By the way, I just want to sort of semi-correct myself in terms of that Alcaraz 9 points in a row thing, and I want to give a shout out to Connor from the First Serve, which I saw an article by him where he highlights Alcaraz winning 9 points in a row, and it was the only time he did so in the entire tournament, which is still remarkable. So when he's wins the last 2 points just before the tiebreak in the 5th set, before then going up 7-0, it's a unbelievable example of just somebody who just decides to just go in and another sort of stratosphere in terms of the zone. So yeah, but coming back to your point, and I think I like the comparison because obviously I highlighted whether Sinner wins the match, whether it still has that thing. I do think that it's one of the reasons as well that Federer Nadal match in 2008 at Wimbledon, I think it is just because of just non-stop quality. We had the drama, we had the swings and the turns and the twists and the momentum and the rain in the 5th set at 2-2, and Tony basically finding Rafa in the locker room actually not as despondent as he expected, and Rafa comes out with a very famous expression where he says to Tony that, you know, I might not win today, but I'm not going to lose.
No puedo saber lo que Tony pensaba decirme en aquel momento o no, pero yo estaba preparado para asumir el reto y para asumir la adversidad en todo momento. Y esto fue lo que le dije a Tony, ¿no? Yo no voy a fallar. Federer podía ganarme la final, pero yo no iba a perder la final. Si el otro me gana, me gana. Pero yo no voy a perder.
Which to me still gives me, you know, hairs on the back of the neck. In other words, I'm not just going to give this to Roger and he's going to have to win it somehow. And that's exactly how it played out in so many ways. And Rafa obviously emerges the winner. And there's a great moment when Roger Federer comes off court at the end and John McEnroe gets him in a quick sort of 30-second soundbite interview where it's like, can I just tell you, I've just witnessed what I think was the greatest match of all time. And we already highlighted the fact that McEnroe was involved in some of those in that same conversation. And Roger, which I just still, whenever I watch this, I just notice he goes, thanks, John, I think he says. And he says, does it matter, a little bit? Does it help? Does it like make the pain a little bit less? And he goes, a little bit, and thanks, John. And I just love the way that Roger I know McEnroe, we all know who he is, and he's, a legend of the sport, but I just like the way that Roger in this moment of despondency still says, thanks, John.
Yeah, he handled very well, because those interviews are so difficult to do.
Of course.
Especially for the loser right after an excruciating defeat like that. Yeah, it was. He handled that with a lot of grace, and Nadal's remark, as you alluded to, was really, it was so Rafa-like to say that. That's what made him the champion that he was.
Indeed. So back to sort of the bigger picture stuff and why it sort of comes into the conversation. I mean, I've got some of these finals here, and I'd love to know, by the way, in terms of men's singles finals, and you last updated your book, I'm going to say about 2012, just after the Australian Open final between Djokovic and Nadal.
Yeah.
So before, including that 2012 Djokovic-Nadal final, we also had 4 other Australian Open finals on the men's side that went 5 sets. And I'm wondering if any of those either featured or came close to featuring in your book. So that's Gerulaitis beating John Lloyd in 77, Edberg Cash in 87, Wilander Cash in 88, and Nadal Federer in 2009. Did any of those feature in your book?
No, I mean, the one that would have come closest to featuring, but I already had a Rafa Roger, and I could have chosen a second, would have been that 09 final was very well played. Mm-hmm. Federer even said it himself months later, or maybe it was even a year or two later, but I remember him referring back to that match and how he felt, and that was very generous of him, because it was that was a loss for him, and a very tough loss, but he thought the quality in that match was extraordinary, and I don't think he went quite as far as to say it was better than Wimbledon in 08, but he kind of implied it. Got
it. I think there's another thing for me, because a lot of these matches, of course, I neither remember nor came close to seeing, either retrospectively or at the time, partly because I had the temerity to not be born until 1979. But also, if I see a scoreline and it's 5 sets, but it doesn't, at least in terms of the scoreline, have the same drama that we see, then that gives me a nice way of just sort of easing it out of this conversation of where to place Sinner and Alcaraz. But
John,
there is
just a quick point. Sorry to interrupt.
Go.
You made me think of something when you refer to those various finals, like Gerulaitis and John Lloyd. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I feel like the general rule I had in doing the book, and I think it would be pretty much consensus on this. Ideally, you'd like it to be the 2 best players in the world, or maybe perhaps 2 of the top 4, but the very upper crust of the game be involved in that match. Not to say that others can't produce pretty dazzling tennis and matches that are worthy of consideration, but I tried to make that the general rule when I wrote the book, that ideally it was 2 of the top 3 or the 2 best, near their best on a particular afternoon on a big occasion. So that's one of my criteria.
88 Wilander Cash. That's actually the one. So basically from 88 onwards, in fact, as I say, there wasn't another 5-setter until 2009, which is remarkable to go well over 2 decades to not have a 5-setter in the Australian Open final. So, sometimes when I said to you before, when I saw these debates on social media and stuff, actually, sometimes it's just a quirk, and you only get 3 5-setters in the first, 40 odd years of the modern era in slams. And so then you might see a list that has 5 in the last 10, 15 years and only 1 from but I just want to elaborate on that. But that Wilander Cash one, by the way, does stand out to me, because I've made a little note where, there was something very important to mention in terms of this conversation. And that does have the dramatic finish of 8-6 in the 5th. Wilander and Cash must have been there or thereabouts. I mean, Cash has obviously won Wimbledon the year before. So in terms of being sort of 2 of the best players in the world, they were certainly recognized in that sort of conversation. And 8-6 in the 5th is just something that makes me think that's a final that I think I've never really heard anyone talk about.
Yeah, it was very well played. It was Wielander's, I would say it was his shining moment in that 88 campaign, because it was in Australia against an Australian, a very aggressive player, making him produce these phenomenal passing shots and just pushing him to the hilt. while, for Mats to win, Paris, I must say, I can't say I put it above Mats beating Lendl in the U.S. Open final, but almost alongside it, just beneath it. So, but that's what got him off and running into his greatest season, was defeating Cash in a great final, for sure. I just would put it a notch below these other ones that we're talking about for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I also think it's quite easy to talk about and maybe just like you talk about that 2009 final between Nadal and Federer in Australia. Wasn't there a sense of inevitability in the fifth set in terms of Nadal winning the match?
There was, not when it started, but suddenly Roger's game, the level just completely dropped. In the last four games, he couldn't find the court. There came a point where it became inevitable. Heading into it, I think we thought it might well be another one of their typically hard-fought close sets, but of course it didn't work out that way, and that's what I think probably stunned Roger, and partially one of the reasons why he might have broken down in tears in the presentation ceremony was he maybe didn't quite know why it happened. Was it weariness? Was it nerves? Who knows? But yes, at a certain point by the middle of the fifth, you saw that Roger was coming apart at the seams.
I wrote a blog just on my own personal blog at the time. This is, 15, 16 years ago, of just like that moment in the trophy ceremony afterwards of just going, I think this is a huge turning point in the rival. I mean, more so than even the 2008 final in terms of the rivalry, Roger sort of having, these losses and painful ones, and Rafa having his number, and the slam race sort of first, maybe in my mind at least, becoming a thing between these guys at least. I mean, it's funny because later on that year, Roger was going to go and usurp Pete Sampras as the person with the most slams. And we know the ebbs and flows of that. But that's quite an easy one for me as well, to sort of just go, great match, unbelievable points, going into the fifth set, some drama and an uncertainty. But again, because of the nature of that fifth set, it's quite easy for me to drop it. And the number of Nadal-Federer matches, I think it could easily be third or fourth just on their rivalry in terms of the matches.
Yeah, fair point. Good point. But I just wanted, backing up what you were just saying, it's interesting because I'm remembering that Nadal was trying to console Federer a bit because he could see how distraught Roger was, and Roger initially couldn't get his speech done, and Rafa put his arm around him, and then Roger was able to give his speech, etc. But one of the things that Nadal said to Federer at that presentation was, you will break this, you're going to break the Sampras record. He wanted to just remind him, it's going to happen, which again was a very nice gesture, very true. But he just wanted
he won the French that year as well, didn't he?
Yes, that's when Roger got his only French. Exactly. Little did either man know that Rafa was going to lose to Soderling, and that was going to be Roger's big chance, and he took it and beat Soderling in the finals. And that's also when the Tommy Haas match occurred that you alluded to earlier. Roger down 2 sets and 4-all in the third and break point. It's an inside-out forehand winner and comes all the way back. So that was as it turned out, who would have believed at that stage? Because you were talking about the changing rivalry with Rafa and Roger. And here, when Rafa won that match in Australia, that had been preceded by Rafa crushing Roger 1-3 in love in the French final, then winning the Wimbledon final that we just discussed, the epic in 2008. They didn't meet at the U.S. Open, but then at the start of 2009, here's Rafa beating him again. So 3 different surfaces, 3 majors, proving beyond dispute that he could now beat him on any surface. And yet, who wins the French Open 4 or 5 months later? It's Roger Federer.
Moving on past that, and even past 2012, I mean, don't worry, we will come back to the 2012 final between Djokovic and Nadal. We'll come back to that at the most important part of this episode, which is when we sort of finally, you and I, place the Sinner Alcaraz somewhere, because it's just such a no-brainer that Djokovic Nadal 2012 is in the conversation that I almost want to dismiss some of the others. 18, and again, 17 Federer Nadal is sort of in the conversation, but 18 Federer Cilic, a 5-setter. Djokovic Team 2020, also a 5-setter, and 2024 Sinner Medvedev. I'm highlighting those ones, and I'm skipping a couple, and people shouting and throwing their things at the TV right now can just hold their horses a second, because we will come back to those other big ones. But I find those quite easy to sort of go, okay, Djokovic team had so many elements to the match when neither player was playing their best, especially Djokovic at times. And again, the sense of inevitability in the fifth set. It had nice moments. We had team up 2-1. Am I right in that one, I think?
Yes. Yeah.
And
yeah,
so you thought
correct.
team's name might be on the trophy, but I just don't think the quality was there at the same time from both players.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think they both played a good fifth. It was an uphill battle for Team, but he kept it to one break and made Novak work, and it was an exciting fifth set. But yes, I agree. And then you alluded to the Zverev match against Team. It was the 2020 U.S. Open.
Yes.
And that, of course, had all the drama in the world because Zverev was up 2 sets and a break, and then he gets tight and it goes to a fifth and he serves for the match, doesn't close him, and eventually loses it in a tight tiebreak. So it had all the elements of drama, but it didn't have the quality at all. I mean, for instance, the Djokovic team you had some ups and downs, but some stupendous quality in the team and Zverev, not necessarily the case. I mean, they both saw this golden opportunity to finally get a major in their collection, and I think it overcame them at times. So that's how I'd look at that one.
Definitely, yeah. Federer, Cilic, I mentioned this sort of example of where the favorite ends up winning. It's 5 sets, but I don't think, again, there were many people that are going to sort of argue in terms of the quality that was on display that day. And again, maybe there was a sense of inevitability. Sinner Medvedev in 24, by the way, very recent, very easy to reflect on. Once Sinner gets his teeth into that match in the 3rd set, and because of the nature of Medvedev's run to the final, the amount of time he'd spent on court, it was just a bit of a painful watch at times to see Medvedev lose yet another final in 5 sets. So again, it doesn't even come close to this conversation of best matches of all time or best slam final.
Totally in accord, completely in accord.
So that sort of leaves us with a couple, but we'll come back to that shortly. So that's obviously Djokovic, Nadal in 2012, Federer, Nadal 2017, and Nadal, Medvedev in 2022. Moving on to the French Open, because now this is sort of a bit more of something where people were very much a fan of, saying the following day, this is the best French Open men's final we've ever seen. And there's been 11 5-setters at the French Open. I'll actually go back from 24 backwards. Alcaraz-Zverev was a great match last year, but for me, it didn't even sort of quite make it in terms of the best match of the year. Never mind best sort of French Open finals of all time. I liked it. I enjoyed it, but Alcaraz has a fairly comfortable lead, I think, in that 5th set. I think it might have been, did he get 2 breaks up at one point?
Yeah. He ran. There was never a doubt, really, the last 2 sets.
Yeah, exactly.
After Zverev dramatically came back to win the 3rd set, I think from 5-2 down and go up 2 sets to 1. No, little doubt. I agree with you. That one didn't meet that one was not of the utmost highest caliber. It was just a very good final.
Djokovic, Tsitsipas 21. I was at that final as well. And similarly, once Djokovic gets his teeth into that match in the 3rd set, it just sort of felt inevitable. Quality, yes, was there at times. But, again, I would say that like the 24 final, I don't think it has the quality, that the Sinner Alcaraz match had, for example, or the drama anywhere near it. Again, maybe Tsitsipas gets back on serve in that 5th set and we start and wins the title somehow, maybe 10-8 in the 5th or whatever. And we have a slightly different conversation or that might have gone to a deciding set tiebreak, and all sorts of things can change, but that doesn't come in the conversation. However, now we're going to sort of go back, because then you've got the Nadal era and just about all of those finals, and even the one that Federer won against Sodling and some of the ones that Djokovic and Wawrinka won were just comfortable wins one way or another. So what about this Gaston Gaudio, Guillermo Coria, all Argentinian affair in 2004 that was 8-6 in the 5th?
Yeah, I saw the match. That was you alluded. Look, we know that Djokovic has after early struggles with Tsitsipas in the first 3 or 4 matches, when Tsitsipas had a couple of wins, he dominated Tsitsipas. So we weren't shocked by the comeback, but Coria was expected to. He had the match in his hands, and that was a collapse, unfortunately, taking nothing away from Gaudio. But Coria we'd seen these epics he played with Rafa. He was in that era, in the early stages of Rafa's career. He was arguably the best of the clay quarters outside of Rafa, and it seemed like we were ready for his coronation, and he couldn't handle the moment. So I did not think that was it was actually painful to watch the fifth set as it got away. So that's my thought on that particular match.
We do have that quite a bit, don't we, in tennis, when it just gets a bit awkward, a bit painful. And that could be, by the way, a very comfortable win for one player or the other. And or again, like you say, when it just sort of gets away from someone. And you know, I have an image right now of going off piste a bit here with the sport, but I have an image of a French golfer whose name escapes me. I think it was 99 at the Open. And he's like he's got his trousers rolled up, and he's in the water. If you remember that particular, where he had a huge lead.
Oh,
Greg
right.
Norman at the Masters, I remember as well. I'm going to say 96, pretty sure it was, over Nick Faldo, and the lead just disappears, and Greg is just struggling with the occasion. So sometimes you get that in tennis where it sort of gets a bit painful watching. In a way, that Medvedev-Sinner match in 2024 falls into that category.
Well, you summed it up well. You summed that one up well, because Medvedev was just so debilitated by all the five setters and endless struggles that he played the first two sets of that match absolutely brilliantly. He was ultra aggressive by his standards and trying to end points quickly, but controlled aggression. You almost thought, wow, you wished you could see him play like this more often. It was exciting and inspiring to watch him adjust his game so beautifully and to meet the circumstances. And then, as you already mentioned, that then, of course, at a certain point by the middle of the third, you knew his legs were gone. And he also started missing more, pressing more. So that there was inevitability on that. That was inevitable too. By the time we got to the view, knew Sinner was going to win. Still some great tennis, but not that absolute top shelf.
Did any of the French Open men's finals make it into your book? So I've got some five setters. I'm just going to reel them off here. 74, we had Borg Orantes. Borg won the last three sets, winning just 2 games. Again, that's quite an easy one, just looking at the scoreline in terms of the greatest of all time. You know, Borg Lendl 81. The person who wins, by the way, is the person I mentioned first. Lendl McEnroe 84. That's one I've heard spoken about a lot because of McEnroe never winning the French Open. So again, narratives help, right? This conversation. McEnroe up 2 sets to love, doesn't win that match, never wins the French Open. That then sort of, even me just saying it, and you know, I don't even remember this match, but even me just saying it makes me think, oh, that's kind of, you know, woo. Chang 89 beating Edberg, Courier Agassi 91, Bruguera Courier 93, Agassi Andre Medvedev, which is a match we touched on earlier as well. Did any of those matches either make your book or come into consideration?
Well, I thought about Lendl McEnroe, historical consequences.
Yeah.
Then again, I rejected it in the end. Obviously, I was going to include McEnroe Borg was at that point my number one match in the initial edition, and then I put it down to 2 after Nadal Federer. But
that's interesting.
But Lendl McEnroe, it was sublime tennis from McEnroe for 2 sets. He smothered Lendl. He made it look like a hard court. He was just terrific. And then he started getting it into with the photographers. There was all this angst and tension, and you knew how badly he wanted to close it out. And his level dropped a bit in the third and fourth. We did have a well-played fifth. I mean, forgotten is the fact also that McEnroe squandered a 4-2 4-set lead and had his chances in the fifth. In the middle of the fifth, there was a 15-40, a 3-all, and he couldn't convert that. And eventually lost it 7-5. But again, I thought it was a groundbreaking, tremendous win for Lendl. I think the point of that match was he didn't get enough credit. Everybody spoke about McEnroe blowing the 2-set lead, but this was Lendl's 5th major final, and he up until then people thought he couldn't handle those difficult moments of tension in the Slam finals. He had lost a couple to Connors where he looked tight in New York. And now here he finally gets his breakthrough, and all everybody wants to talk about is McEnroe's collapse. But again, I would say the match was just a shade below these others that we're talking about. It was certainly worthy of consideration, considering who they were, meeting in a major final, the consequences. Lendl winning his breakthrough first major, and McEnroe's one and only best chance to take the French, added it to his collection. And it's a match that he's talked about ever since. Anytime he goes back to Paris, that subject will come up. So that one didn't quite make the book, but could have.
Got it. I think everybody tuning in now is pretty clear on how we're sort of, eliminating some of these matches from the conversation by just, again, directly comparing some of the things that we saw take place in Paris 10 days or so ago. Moving on to Wimbledon, which is the slam, by the way, that has the most 5-set men's singles finals. For me, it's not a surprise, just in terms of how frequently you're going to hold serve on the grass at SW19. And so therefore, you're more likely to get, maybe some tiebreakers and some tight affairs that do go 5. At least that was my rationale when I saw that Wimbledon had 16, by far and away the most 5-setters, and the other 3 are fairly close with 10 or 11. Newcomb beats Roswell in 5 in 1970. Newcomb then beats Stan Smith in 71. Smith then beats Ilya Nastase in 72. These are all 5-setters, of course.
By the way, just a quick comment that the Smith Nastase, you mentioned those 3, which were all great. Mm-hmm. I did put Smith Nastase in my book. They were the 2 best players in the world in 72. Nastase went on to win the U.S. Open over Arthur Ashe, who had beaten Smith in the quarters. And this was 7-5 in the 5th, and it was the classic kind of character clash, the stoic, imperturbable Smith against the rambunctious and ever uptight Nastase. I mean, the contrast in personalities and game styles too, because Ilya was a brilliant shot maker, an artist, and Stan was this straightforward, superb serve and volleyer. So you had all those contrasts and some very good high quality tennis. And eventually Stan got it 7-5 in the 5th. So that one did make the book. Just wanted to make that comment.
Great. And congratulations, Steve, on being the first and maybe last person to ever use the word rambunctious on this show. I've just had to look it up, by the way. Uncontrollably exuberant, boisterous is the definition I'm seeing here on the first dictionary I see. I've just had to write it down and even just check my own spelling on that one. Okay, good. No, definitely interrupt me and highlight ones that made the book. I'm very curious about that. But equally, that Smith beating Nastase one, 7-5 in the 5th is something I just made a quick note of as you reflected on it and the differing natures and the quality. But it didn't make sort of it didn't come close to your thinking. And obviously, also when you had the rewrite or the edition, so I should say. It doesn't quite come into sort of Nadal, Federer, 08, Nadal, Djokovic, 2012.
No, definitely not. But I felt it was worthy, and I was basically writing about 30 matches and history of the game, and I thought it had its place, and it was it was memorable, and it was a signature moment for Smith.
Cool. Borg beating Connors in 77. Borg beating Tanner in 79. I'm sure.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Borg Connors, which you could make a case that I didn't use it in my book, but that's another one I could have. I used Borg Connors from the 76 U.S. Open final, which actually was 4 sets, but to me was higher quality in a lot of ways. But there were a lot of ups and downs in the 77 Wimbledon final. After Connors won the first, he got crushed in the next 2, squeezed out the 4th, and then they did have a stunning 5th set where Connors was down 4-love in the 5th and got it all the way back to 4-all, 15-love, and double faulted. And I heard him say on a recent podcast, John, that he got into it with somebody in the crowd. He heard somebody say something to the crowd, and he kind of responded. It sounded like a little bit of trash talk going on, but enough to distract him. And Borg never lost another point. He won at 6-4 in the 5th. So after that spectacular comeback from Connors, it fell short for Jimmy, and Bjorn hung on to win his 2nd of 5 Wimbledons in a row.
1980, of course, we had Borg beating McEnroe in 5 sets. It's the 8-6 in the 5th. Obviously, McEnroe gets his revenge a year later, albeit in 4 sets. And I did say I want to sort of hone in on the 5-set matches, but those 2 matches, 80 and 81, the Borg McEnroe of 1980 made your book.
Oh, absolutely.
Both, but obviously both editions. But yeah, I'll say the second.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's the one that I consider. I'd still put it right behind Nadal, Federer on my list.
What about? And this is the only time we're going to mention a 4-setter. What about the McEnroe Borg one? I mean, it was a 4-setter, but that you've got the narrative there with obviously Borg winning the previous 5 versions or iterations of Wimbledon from 76 through to 80. But obviously McEnroe then does get over the line, having lost the first set in 81. Did that have lots of drama and
well,
quality?
yeah, a couple of tie breaks. There was some very good. It was very good / great, but it wasn't nowhere near as magical as what they produced the year before. And I think it almost needed a 5th set again, which they'd had at the U.S. Open in 1980 as well. Following Wimbledon, they had a very good 5-setter there at the U.S. Open of 1980. But that Wimbledon 81, I think we had to have a 5th set if it was going to go into the top level category.
Got it. Exactly. And that helps as well in terms of this show that they unbeknownly made. 82. And so obviously people are going, wow, you got to talk about, don't worry, the McEnroe-Borg encounter, the 5-setter. We'll come back into our thoughts in a moment. Connors beats McEnroe in 82 in 5 sets, but then we have an 8-year gap before another 5-setter, Edberg beating Becker. Now we're in, by the way, this sort of late 80s, early 90s where John's memory kicks in. And
yeah, just
Edberg,
quick, John,
go.
Quickly, just before you go by the 82 Wimbledon final, that one would have also been close to qualifying of that upper level. Connors had won it in 74, so there's an 8-year gap. McEnroe, of course, was a defending champion, having beaten Borg the year before. So he's the favorite. And Connors had revamped his serve. He adjusted his toss. He was serving more aggressively, trying to serve and volley selectively when he could. And it's a set all, and Connors serves for the 3rd set. And what happens? He 2 double faults in a row from 30 all when serving for the set. And you thought he'd taken himself out of the match because he lost that set. But he comes back and wins the 4th in a breaker. Gets the 1 early break in the 5th, and he was like Muhammad Ali down the stretch, pointing to the crowd. As he closed in on it and got to 5-3 in the 5th and served it out. He's like one more. I mean, he was really playing to the crowd, and they were loving it. And it was his day, and that was maybe his. To me, it was his most momentous triumph, considering it was over McEnroe on the center court. He'll always allude to the 5 U.S. Opens, and there were some wonderful moments there. But to me, that win over McEnroe was the most impressive of his career, given that it was at Wimbledon, where John's the defending champion, where John should have the advantage, and Jimmy found a way to stop him in 5 enthralling sets.
Also, I think, again, we probably like to work in little categories and then go, this one. So a little bit like with Federer and Nadal, and I said about that 2009 final, but we can quite quickly sort of eliminate it from inquiries, if you like, by going, you know what, it was great, but the 5th set didn't quite have the drama, felt a bit inevitable in the end. Roger didn't have the level in the last few games, and we can compare it to other Nadal-Federer matches quite directly. Maybe even this one, although the personnel are different, maybe you just go, you know what, Connors McEnroe 82 was great, but it wasn't Borg McEnroe 1980 in a way. And you've got Connors winning his 2nd title. McEnroe's already got over the line as well the previous year. So again, maybe just as some of the sort of narratives and comparisons, just put it just down a notch or 2. Or is it also the quality? Maybe, I don't know what your memories are of the quality of that match compared to other Wimbledon finals.
Yeah, the quality, it fluctuated, but I thought overall it was very high quality stuff. And certainly from Connors it was. And Connors played a almost impeccable 5th set in the way he kept protecting his own serve, and he got the 1 break on John, and then he served it out with a lot of confidence. So I would say very good, great quality. Not Nadal, Federer, not Borg, McEnroe, but awfully close.
The Edberg Becker years, so they contested 3 finals in a row from 88 to 90. Edberg winning in 88 and 90, and sandwiched in between, Becker winning 1 in straight sets. I look at those as sort of a 3-chunk series that Edberg had the edge on, as it turns out, over those 3 years. I remember a few rain delays in there. This is obviously me as a kid coming home from school on the Monday. I think there was one that did stretch over to the Monday because of the rain. I don't remember which of those 3 it was. And I remember Becker as well. These are just sort of childhood memories. Becker occasionally wearing like a jumper, a sleeveless jumper at times, because it was still pretty chilly during some of those Wimbledons. As I say, I don't remember them as being, oh my God, I'm falling off my seat in terms of how unbelievably tense and how unbelievably high quality they were. It was also sort of Wimbledon very much in its serve volley mode and sometimes serve botting as well. And so even though they did contest a 5-setter in 1990, it doesn't really come into my thinking of being among the sort of top 5 matches of all time in Grand Slam.
No, not. It was interesting because there was almost a symmetry to that last one, John, the 90 final, because of 2-6-2 sets for Edberg. He's rolling and playing just breathtaking serve and volley tennis. And then Boris comes back 3-3 the next two. And Boris goes up 3-1 in the 5th. And it was a crucial missed forehand volley when he was trying to cement that break, consolidated, and Edberg broke back on a pretty easy forehand volley miss from Boris that turned the entire contest upside down, and Edberg came back to win 6-4 in the 5th. So of their 3 finals, that one was definitely the best. The first one was the rainy one that you talked about. They played, I think, 5 games on Sunday afternoon and had to come back on Monday to complete it. And it was more rain. There was another delay, but they finally got it in. And it was a pretty straightforward 4-set win for Stefan. And then Boris answered with a straight set win the next year in '89. The surprising thing about it, just in a capsule comment, John, is that Boris was winning basically 2/3 of his career matches against Stefan. The feeling was Boris at his best beats Stefan at his best. But in the 3 Wimbledon finals, it's Edberg who had the composure to come through and win 2 of the 3, which is remarkable retrospectively.
So probably of the kind of that spell, and I would go back as well, sort of from the post sort of Connors, Borg, McEnroe era, sort of from 85 through to, say, the mid-90s when Sampras obviously starts to dominate. That sort of decade, there's only one real Wimbledon final for me that could be in a conversation of among the best Slam finals of all time. But maybe this is my memories as a 12-year-old playing tricks on me. But I do remember with great fondness the Agassi-Ivanisevic final because of the contrast in styles in particular.
Yes, I would put Agassi-Ivanisevic well above, for instance, the other memorable occasion, the Goran-Ivanisevic coming through and winning over Goran's finally getting the title over Rafter in 5 sets in 01. That was I put it almost similar. They were good quality matches, very good, not great quality, I would say.
Yeah, that Ivanisevic, sorry, can I just interject regarding Ivanisevic Rafter again? Had all the drama in the world, had all the narrative in the world. Neither player had won a Wimbledon title. Of course, Rafter had at least won 1 slam, whereas Ivanisevic, ends up being his only slam. There's unbelievable stories. Obviously, Goran, I think, had a wild card that year in 01. Am I right?
He did. Wild card, and he was ranked 125 in the world.
Right, exactly. 9-7 in the 5th. People's Monday, I think they called it, just because of the nature of the fandom there that day. Had loads of ingredients, but I think there was one missing ingredient, which is the quality, I think.
Goran would agree with you. Goran would completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story quickly about that, though. I was up in Newport a couple of years ago, and Rafter had come back. He was doing some pro-am stuff, and I was around a bunch of the players, including Rafter.
Okay. And
he pulls out his phone and he shows me a photo. And it's Goran had sent him the photo. Goran had been at Wimbledon coaching Novak, and he's standing in front of the champions list where he had beaten Rafter, and he's basically trying to rub it in. Very playful, but he'd sent the photo to Rafter. Just to remind him, guess what? I beat you that day. I thought it was very amusing. But
I think they had a good relationship even before the match. I think there's a story about them speaking, I don't know, somehow on the phone the day before. There's also a story about Ivanisevic wearing the same T-shirt throughout the fortnight very superstitiously because he didn't want to change his shirt in terms of winning matches and stuff. So there's loads of wonderful narratives, the meaning it had for Ivanisevic as he's crying.
Well, think about it. Not only had Goran lost the match that you just referred to with Agassi 6-4 in the 5th in 92, he gets beaten by Pete in straight sets in the 94 final, and then he was had 2-set points for a 2-set lead over Pete in the 98 final and was unable to, he missed a couple of back-end returns on the set points. Sampras won the set and eventually beat Goran in 5 sets. And that one was shattering for Goran because it's his 3rd Wimbledon final loss, and he can't know if he's ever going to get another opportunity. So it looked as if he would have had better opportunities in any of those 3 years, 92, 94, 98. And what happens? He's fortunate enough to get that wild card in 2001 and somehow wins the event with a string of really impressive triumphs, capping it off with a win over Rafter. But he beat Roddick, he beat Staffen. He had a lot of good wins along the way, and he served like the Goran of 94. It was astonishing.
Moving on, 5-setters between Federer and Nadal in 07 and that obviously memorable one in 08. 2009, I think this is the one, again, actually, I'm going to come back to this when we start talking about our 5, 6, 7, whatever matches. Federer, Roddick, I think it's the most contentious one, but hold that thought for now, Steve. 14, we had Djokovic beating Federer in 5. Djokovic 2019 over Federer in 5. And
yeah, that's the one that I put. The 14 was very high quality tennis, especially for the first 3.5 sets, by the way. And then Djokovic had led 5-2 in the 4th, got kind of tight, and Roger made a magnificent comeback to take that to a 5th. And then Novak steadied himself in the 5th after taking a bathroom break and looking at himself in the mirror, which of course Andy Murray had done against Djokovic in the 2012 U.S. Open final. But anyway, a lot of people loved. I think the quality was great in 14, but the historic consequences in 19 were so monumental. With Roger, who's approaching, he's 37, almost 38. And he's beaten Rafa in the semis, which Rafa had played great that tournament leading up to the semis. And Roger beat him I think in the end, rather comfortably in 4 sets, I would argue. And so he came into the final with a little bit of a boost, given the win over Nadal. And then, of course, he has the 2 match points. Novak won all 3 of his sets in that 5-setter. All were in tie breaks. No unforced errors in three tie breaks. None in the 3 combined. That ended up being the difference. But Rogers serves for the match. Came from 4-2 down in the 5th. Served for it at 8-7, 40-15, John, having served consecutive aces. And Novak rallies from double match point down to beat him 13-12 in the 5th. So I just feel like when you consider the importance of both of those men historically, Wimbledon final on the line, their 3rd Wimbledon final, because not only did Novak beat Roger in 14, he repeated it in 15 in 4 sets. So here it was their 3rd time, and going in, Djokovic, the clear favorite, given they'd won the Australian that year, and at this point he's the better player. But Roger put on an inspired performance, and it wasn't quite enough. And that was the 3rd time that Novak. He'd twice done it at the U.S. Open in the semifinals, coming from double match point down, and now he does it in the final of Wimbledon from double match point down. So given that, and also the fact that it was a tiebreak at 12-all rather than 6-all, meant that this was in essence like a 6-set match. And yet the standard from these guys throughout that 5th was remarkably high, given how long they'd been out there and how much was riding on the outcome.
What did you think of Novak's level in the 2 sets that he lost?
Well, that's a fair point. It wasn't very good. It was a strange part of the match that each time he'd come off a winning set. It wasn't a very good level from him in the 2nd set or the 4th, but it was very high from Roger. And then Novak, and again, if you'd had a 6-2 in the 5th here, we wouldn't be talking about this. If you'd had a 6-4 in the 5th, maybe we wouldn't be talking about it. But the fact that it was a tiebreaker at 12-all, the 13-12 in the 5th set Wimbledon final, that took it to another level in my mind. That's why I rate it so high.
The Alcaraz-Djokovic final in 2023, you and I spoke about this match at length about 18 months ago, and an unbelievable Wimbledon final. I don't think it's quite as good as, and we can really make again one of those direct comparisons and putting it in boxes and stuff and categories. I think I would have Alcaraz-Sinner ahead of it for, I think, many of the reasons I've laid out already.
Well, I would put it well ahead of it. I would, because for 2 reasons. Number one, a nervous start. Novak was terrific in the 1st set, buttoned up, as they say, giving nothing away. And Carlos was spraying a lot of forehand returns long. He was over anxious.
Yeah.
So it was a fairly routine first set, and then a very good second set from both that Djokovic won. Djokovic should have won, I should say, when he had a set point and missed a backhand into the net tape. And Carlos comes out of that, wins the third kind of pretty comfortably despite one very long game. Good comeback from Novak in the fourth, but a fairly routine fifth after Novak missed a chance with a swing volley to go up too low. So it was basically one break in the fifth. So again, high quality, very impressive for Alcaraz, who had the cramps at the French Open against Novak in the semis, to bounce back and win his first Wimbledon. But again, I can't put it up there with those other absolute epics.
Okay, great. US Open 5-setters. I've got them out in front of me here. There's 10 of them. There's quite a few that I think I can ease out of our conversation. Team Zverev, we touched upon it. As dramatic as it was, and the twists and the turns, and really how Zverev should have won that somehow. But it's just the quality was, well, we've already spoken about it. Nadal-Medvedev 2019, I was at that match, was a great match and had loads of the characteristics we need. But for me, it's no comparison to the 22 final that they contested in Australia in terms of just where that ranks. Djokovic losing to Murray in 2012 and Federer losing to Del Potro in 2009. Both had 6-2s in the fifth, funny enough, for the winner. I have fond memories of both for very different reasons. Murray finally getting over the line in terms of a slam. Del Potro winning his only slam, and maybe the surprise element of that win.
Yeah, and also, John, just a quick comment there.
Okay.
First of all, a quick reference to the Murray-Djokovic.
Yep.
Horrendous conditions.
Yes, wind. Yeah.
Yeah, the win was just absolutely. I remember that Djokovic had played David Ferrer in the semis, and the match got carried over to the next day. They had to finish it up on Sunday. It was the storming had come in on Saturday. It was still windy, and then when the final was played, yeah, the conditions were miserable. Andy, with his feel, he did a better job in the wind, and he won the first two. Novak won the next two, and then Andy got the fifth. So there was still some stunning tennis nonetheless, but not one of their, I would not consider that one of their higher quality contests because the conditions prevented them from playing their very best tennis. But still an important win for Murray, John, to finally, that sort of led to Wimbledon 13, where he also beat Novak in straight sets and eventually got a second Wimbledon in 16.
And the other 5-setters, starting from the beginning in 68, Arthur Ashe beating Tom Ocker. And the note I've made here is just simply 14-12, which is the first set, I think, 14-12.
That's the first set, right.
Yeah, right. Nastase beating Ashe in 72. Newcomb over Jan Koders, the Czech, in 73.
That was a great one, by the way. The Ashe matches were terrific matches, and heartbreaker for him in 72 against Nastase, because Ashe had 2-1 up a break in the fourth and lost in 5. The Ocker win was historic because it was the very first U.S. Open, and Arthur, as the American taking it, was a very popular triumph. But the Newcomb-Kodis match is one of the sort of the hidden treasures. Okay. Kodis, of course, had gotten his couple of French Opens, and he'd been in the finals of the U.S. Open, losing to Smith in 71, and now he's got another chance. And Newcomb was sort of on something of a comeback trail that led him through 74. There was a period there where he was really playing the best tennis of anybody. And this match with Kodis was a beauty because it pitted the serve and volley style of Newcomb against Kodis, who had a phenomenal one-handed backhand, a great returner. So the fans got a nice contrast in styles and an extraordinary match.
Other 5-setters as well during this period, or a little bit after. We've got McEnroe beating Borg in 80 in 5 sets, Wilander beating Lendl in 88, and Agassi.
Yeah, quick comment on McEnroe, Borg, if I may. Borg came back. Borg got discouraged because he had a couple of chances to serve out the first set against McEnroe, which he lost in the tie, but he didn't serve it out, and he was upset with himself, and he kind of caved in the second set. Won one game. It was a bad second set from Borg, but he fought back gallantly to win the third and fourth. Hard-fought close sets, one of them a breaker. And then they go to the fifth, and it's 3-all, and he got a questionable call on the baseline. And Bjorn, who of course wanted so badly to win the U.S. Open. I mean, here's a guy that wins 6 French Opens and then 5 Wimbledons in a row. He wants that Open in his collection, and he got very perturbed by a call. and
Oh,
that and he served a couple of double faults in that game. McEnroe broke and went on to beat him 6-4 in the fifth. It was a little bit disappointing in that sense that you saw Borg, who was normally implacable. He got distraught. He fought so far behind to get to be on serve at 3-all in the fifth, and he was very upset by that call. Normally, those things would roll off him, not on this occasion. So that's the moment I remember from that. Great match. Not quite the equal of their Wimbledon match, but a pretty good follow-up.
interestingly, just looking at this list of the five setters in New York, I've just crystallized something in my mind, albeit maybe falsely, is that as fond as the memories I have of the US Open on both men's and women's sides, and thinking about some of these US Opens, I'm thinking of 2022 when Carlos won it in 4 over Ruud in the final, and of course en route beating Sinner in 5. And some epics as well in terms of, I remember 70 semi-finals on the women's side in 2020 and so on. So I could keep going, but I want to bring this down to something. Is actually on the men's side, at least 2021, when Emma Raducanu won it on the women's and Medvedev denies Djokovic the calendar slam on the men's, one of the most unbelievable US Opens in my memory. And yet just the finals didn't quite deliver in terms of being, they had lots of narratives with, of course, we know the Raducanu narrative, and we know the Djokovic sort of tightrope that he was walking that day as well. But actually, I'm looking at all these US Open finals and thinking, actually, probably none of them come into the conversation over the best slam finals of all time.
I agree. Just a quick, brief mention of a non-final match was, of course, that Carlos, yes, Ruud in 4 sets in the final. He had a string of 5 setters.
Carlos-Sinner,
and one of them, he had 3 5-setters, Cilic and Sinner, and then finally Francis Tiafoe. But the Sinner match, once again, was a gem. And for a non-final, it was the match of the year. And Sinner had a match point in the 4th set, and Carlos came back, and Sinner went up a break in the 5th, and finally Carlos won the match. But it was spectacular. It was their best match other than the one we just had played at Roland Garros. It was and once again, Sinner unable to win despite, in this case, 1 match point.
And again, it's all about just trying to define. I mean, that was the same year, of course, that we had Nadal Medvedev, and I think it was difficult for many people to choose which of those two was the bigger match or the better match. But
you said correctly, John. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just don't want to forget. You said correctly that the Nadal Medvedev 22 Australia has to go higher than the 19 U.S. Open final, even though the 19 U.S. Open final was a remarkable comeback from Medvedev from 2 sets down to take it into the 5th. Yeah. But just a brief comment on that 22 Australian. It's 2 sets to love for Medvedev, and he's got 3-2 love 40 in the 3rd to break and maybe break the match open. And Rafa, in typical fashion, when he held, he had that look in his eyes. He's looking over at his corner and his people, just as he had done in big matches against, like the Djokovic match in the 13 U.S. Open final, some crucial junctures. And only Rafa holding just to avoid going down a break in the 3rd. He's still in a desperate plight at 3-all in 3rd. But he had that look like, I can still do this. I'm going to win this. I'm not dead. I'm going to win. That's how I interpreted his look. But he got the hold, and then he comes all the way back into the 5th. He's serving for the match, 5-4, 30 love. And Medvedev wins the next point. Rafa doubles. The next thing you know, he's broken. It's 5-all, but he breaks right back and serves it out. So here he was almost laughing at the end of the match because he was remembering there'd been so many excruciating moments for him at that tournament, including the match with Novak at the 2012 when he's 4-2, 30-15 in the 5th set and missed a backhand pass down the line with a big opening. So if he would have served his way to 5-2, that would have been pretty tough for Novak. And then he's thinking also about Roger coming back from 3-1 down in the 5th to beat him in the 17 final. So I think in a strange way, he thought he had this one coming to him, that somehow fate was on his side. Destiny was on his side in this case. But the tennis that it took for Rafa to beat Medvedev at his age, and considering that Medvedev had won the U.S. Open, you already alluded to it, stopped Novak from winning the Grand Slam. Medvedev is going for a 2nd straight major. So I think that was a is a phenomenal victory for Nadal to win at long last, after having won it in 09, 13 years later, to claim a second Australian Open crown.
Steve, having already sort of whittled quite, I'd say, those US Open finals out of the way, I'm now looking back at the French Open list of 11 5-setters. Many people quickly took their take on Alcaraz-Sinner as being the best men's singles French Open final of all time. And I think it probably is. I mean, I'm leaning on you, obviously, for some of those matches in the 70s and 80s, but also partly myself for some of the more recent ones. And Alcaraz, Zverev, Djokovic, Tsitsipas is just a non-starter. They're not even in the conversation. You know, we mentioned the Gaston, Gaudio, Guillermo Correa one, but is Lendl McEnroe maybe the one that might
closest? You could say the closest, but I still don't think it comes very close. I think it's clear cut in the end, because of the level of play across 5 sets and the comebacks, all the reasons we cited earlier that made it such a stupendous contest. No, I would put it pretty much in a class by itself among French Open finals.
Great. Wimbledon actually has a few in this conversation. I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 matches now across the 3 first slams of the year. And we've already spoken about the French Open in terms of like crystallizing that. I've got, I think really, if we're going to sort of do a direct comparison, I think the 2019 Wimbledon final, Djokovic, Federer, and 2009 Federer, Roddick, we could compare those two. And I don't know if you've got a preferable one over those two in terms of which one you think was.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely go clearly on Novak and Roger for the reasons I cited, or especially the 13, 12, and the 5th set. However, I will say that the Roddick, that was a shining moment for him. In defeat, I think he played the best match I've ever seen him play. He just was not able to get across the finish line. And one crucial backhand volley at 6-5 in the second set tiebreak that could have given him a 2-set lead. An errant backhand volley was probably what cost him that title. But he had 6-2 in the tiebreak also, so he actually had 4-set points. But that did make the book. I thought it was. It was the grittiest, the grittiest Wimbledon final that Federer ever won, because he would probably be the first. He said the next day, I won it on willpower. So in essence, he was basically trying to say, in some ways, he was outplayed by Andy, despite serving 50 aces. Roger, he was probably outplayed, but he found a way to win it, 16-14 in the 5th. So I still hold that match in very high regard.
I've now got the French Open final of this year in a list of 8. I've still got that 2019 one. I've left that one there for now. I think there's another one we can probably take off the list, which is the 07 Nadal Federer match, partly because it just gets overshadowed by 2008, right?
It gets overshadowed by 8. And also, John, it's not quite like the Australian of 09 in the sense that Roger collapsed in those last 4 games, that you kind of knew Rafa was running away with it. But it was a decisive 5th set. Nadal had the early 4 breakpoint opportunities early on. The beginning of the 5th set was gripping. But then once Roger got out of those jams, he essentially ran away with the 5th set. Maybe that one needed a closer 5th set, because the tennis for 4 sets was just magnificent. So again, I think it comes down to the decisiveness of the 5th set that maybe but it's certainly up there. I put it pretty much alongside 09 Australia.
2 matches that I think we can say are above, and I think most people would agree with us that they would just be ahead of the Sinner Alcaraz match, would be the Wimbledon finals of 2008 and 1980. Are you in agreement on that one?
Oh yeah, as I said at the outset, to me, those 2 Wimbledon finals are the 2 best of all time. Period. Anywhere. I would still stick with Nadal, Federer 08, and then Borg McEnroe right behind it, number 2 on my list. And that's not just for Wimbledon, but anywhere in the world.
So then I have basically 5 matches, and it could be anywhere in between 3 and 7, basically on the list. But I don't know. I think this Sinner Alcaraz match was of a higher quality throughout than 2019 Djokovic Federer. What do you think to that?
Yes, I would agree with that. But to me, I still rate the Djokovic Federer only barely above it for different reasons, and mainly because, I mean, the reasons I cited, for instance, the Djokovic winning all those sets in tiebreaks, Djokovic rallying from double match point down. There's the similarity, is that he saves 2 match points, Carlos saves 3. I feel like, to me, there was just such historical significance, and the high points were so high that despite Djokovic's subpar performances in the second and fourth, I still would put it just a whisker ahead of Sinner Alcaraz, a whisker.
What about these 3 Aussie finals, 22, 17, and 12? I'm thinking you're definitely putting 2012 ahead of Sinner Alcaraz.
No, I'm not.
Ooh,
I'm not.
okay.
I put it just a notch, just barely above. To me, I grouped those 3 so close together. I put Nadal, Federer, and Borg McEnroe as my clear 1 and 2. But then that 3, 4, and 5 is so tight in these Grand Slam finals. So I put Djokovic, Federer just above, and Nadal, Djokovic from Australia just below. I think this one had a, again, just to nitpick, which is all we can do when we're getting these sterling contests, right? I mean, we're nitpicking. But if you look at the first 3 sets of Novak and Rafa in that Aussie final, they were very good. It was a terrific first set, 7-5.
Yeah.
For Rafa, but then the next 2 were fairly clear cut for Novak. I think they were good sets, very well played from Djokovic, but Nadal decidedly outplayed. And then it entered the realm of the all-time contest because Nadal somehow held serve at the end of the 4th set, 3-4, love 40 down. He held on, so Djokovic was unable to serve for the match. And then in the tiebreak, Nadal was 5-3 down in the tiebreak, 2 points from defeat, and he won that. So then we had a great 5th and a nice comeback from Djokovic from 4-2, 30-15 down. So a lot of elements, but I'd still say that I still like the Sinner Alcaraz on, again, just the slightest edge. But those 3 matches are so debatable. You can debate them long and hard.
Would you have all 3, though, below, like 22, 17, and 12? Would you have all 3 below Alcaraz-Sinner?
22, yes, I would.
Which of the 3 Australian Open, if you had to choose one of the 3 Aussie Open finals, 22, 17, or 12, which one would you go? That was the better one if we had a great
12. I put 12 as at the top.
Okay.
I put Nadal, Federer, given again who they were and what they were now. These 2 revitalized. They'd each had their issues at injuries the year before, and Roger with the knee at Wimbledon, and Roger making his comeback, and Rafa had a very disrupted couple of years. So here they are in the finals, and then for Federer to reel off 5 games in a row from 1-3 in the 5th to beat Nadal was, I think, his most monumental victory. And it was a hot. The 5th set was what really made that match. I thought it was uneven for 4 sets up until then, but the 5th set was magnificent. I'd say the standard overall for despite the qualms I had about it that I just expressed about the first 3 sets of Djokovic and Nadal 2012, it still was a higher. I would still put it above Nadal Federer from start to finish. And it had the last 2 sets combined were what made that match what it was. The tiebreaker in the 4th that went to Nadal, and the 7-5 in the 5th to Djokovic from a breakdown.
I think I've got a list of 7 from you, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. So we've got, for Steve's list of 7, we'll start at 7 actually. 2022 AO final. So Nadal beating Medvedev in 5 sets. 2017. I've got it number 6 for you. Just sort of listening to what you've been saying. 2017, obviously, that's the sort of Federer comeback in terms of tennis, at least, if not necessarily the match, winning in 5 over Rafa. 2012, I've got it number 5 for you. Australian Open men's final, where obviously Djokovic wins that match in the longest match of all time, which again, in a way, can elevate this higher up the list for some, and maybe me included. We'll come to mine in a second. I've now got you putting Sinner Alcaraz at 4. Does that sound about right? With Wimbledon
Yes,
2019 at
it
3?
does. It is right. It is right.
Mm. So
And then,
Wimbledon,
and
I
then,
think this
and
Wimbledon
then,
2019 one is very interesting for me because I don't have it on my list of 6, if you like, but I'll come to that in a second. Does that list sound right to you anyway? That I've got this Sinner Alcaraz at 4 and those ones after and before
yeah,
it?
it is. Yeah, that is. And then I go from there to the Djokovic Federer Wimbledon of 9, and then I go from there to Borg McEnroe at 2, and obviously Nadal Federer at 1.
Yeah.
But it's it's a tightly knit pack.
Yeah.
I just feel like the top 2, I'm still comfortable with those as the top 2, despite the extraordinary skirmish we just witnessed.
I have a top 3 that I'm pretty comfortable with. I can see, the 2-1 also being spoken about most. Obviously, Wimbledon 08 at 1, Wimbledon 80 at 2. I've gone for Australian Open 2012, Djokovic, Nadal at 3. I just
so wait
think
a minute. You're 1 and 2. Give me your 1 and 2 again.
One is Wimbledon 08. 2 is Wimbledon 1980. Again, just it's just
so we're agreed on that, right?
Quite easy, yeah. But I've elevated Australian Open final, men's final of 2012. I think yes, there were moments when Djokovic was very much on top and Nadal was distant. I think the points differential at the end of the match was comfortably in favor of Novak as well. Interestingly, the Sinner one was 193 points for Sinner, 192 for Alcaraz, which I thought was fascinating. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, but I've got that. I've got the historical consequence. I've got the 30-15 embedded in my mind of which I've heard Tony Nadal speak about even to me a couple of years ago in an interview where he still thinks about that point sometimes at 30-15 where Rafa just basically has a very easy backhand down the line that he misses.
Break up in the 5th.
Yeah.
And 40-30 or the 30-15. I don't remember well. It was a ball very close, goes up. But this is what happened.
And he just can't
he didn't have to play it anywhere near as close to the line.
No,
because Novak was pretty stranded on the other side. So
but historical consequence, Rafa wins that match. We're talking maybe differently in terms of not just it could be weeks at number 1 and how that year pans out and the effect that has. But I don't know. I've still got that longest match of all time, 5 hours 53. Am I right? For that?
Yes, 5:53. Now, you again, just to back up your point about matches that could have changed history. I mean, obviously, this again is one of the other reasons why I like having Djokovic Federer so high is that who's to know. That would have been one more major for Roger, one less for Novak. Who knows how that changes the course of history in the 2019. And then you go to 2018 when Novak and Rafa had, you could argue, was maybe their best played match, even though it was not a final, but it was incredible 5-setter in the semifinals, played over 2 days under the roof. And both of them knowing that they're going to play a debilitated Kevin Anderson, who's come off a 5-set marathon against Isner. And so that was in essence a final. But again, that could have changed history because Rafa inevitably would have won that Wimbledon rather than Novak. So you look at all these matches and yet somehow Djokovic winning so many of the most crucial contests when he had to.
And by centimeters at times.
What's that?
By centimeters and 1 point, as you talk about that passing shot at 2018 at Wimbledon or the one down the line there that we mentioned before that Rafa really just needs to get it in the court and he's won the point and potentially the match. I've gone for the AO Nadal Federer of 2017 at number 6. Excuse me for jumping around a bit. I'm just trying to get it down. And my biggest debate is I've got 2 matches now at 4 and 5. And so obviously one is Sinner Alcaraz that we just saw 10 days ago. And the other one is the Nadal Medvedev one of 2022. Now, there could be some heart involved overhead here. And the emotions that I was feeling and experiencing watching that Nadal come back that may have affected my ranking here. And I don't mind being criticized for that. So my question is,
you're entitled. I would
say, do I put Roland Garros? I mean, you've got. It's not championship points, but though that Love 40 moment, at 2-0.
Yeah, right. No, look, I'd love to hear Rafa talk more about that match. I haven't heard him yet. He was on a podcast with Radek. They didn't get to that particular match, but I would think he would put it high on his list of gratifying victories, maybe just below some of the matches with Novak and Roger, because to do it at that age and to come from 2 sets down against in such a physically demanding. I mean, it was never going to be easy with Medvedev on the other side of the net, putting you through war, point in and point out. So I hear you on that. I just believe that Sinner and Alcaraz took it to a higher level altogether. The tennis they played and the closely contested sets and 3 tie breaks, and it really had it all.
Well, I think despite your very, very strong argument there, I am putting the Sinner Alcaraz at 5 and AO at 22. And okay, it's just simply this. It is heart over head, quite possibly. If you said to me, John, you could be at any tennis match of all time, and I know, I'm guessing you've been at some of these matches, and great for you in terms of Wimbledon at 08. Were you at that final?
Yes, I was.
Wimbledon 80, McEnroe Borg?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
I was. Yeah.
Wow. So there we go. And Australia 2012, men, Djokovic, Nadal.
No, I was not there. I was there 2017. I was
2017
for Roger Rafa.
So you've been of my 6, you've been at 3 of the finals, because I've got that at 6 in 2017. You were also there for the Wimbledon 80 and Wimbledon 08. Were you at Wimbledon 2019?
Yes.
Okay. So you were at many of these matches that we've been speaking about. But finally, my list is, and I will repeat yours afterwards, I've got a list of 6 because I find it quite easy to sort of put 2019 Wimbledon in a slightly lower, for me, scaling. But my 6 are 2017 Australian Open final with Nadal losing that one to Roger in 5 sets. I've got that Sinner Alcaraz in at number 5. I've got, as I said, perhaps heart over head in terms of the emotions that I witnessed and experienced in Australia 22 of Nadal winning that from, on the verge of retirement a few weeks or a few months before, and thinking that he's not going to be back on a tennis court, never mind winning slams and the way he did it. And also there is that Love 40 moment, which feels not quite identical. It does feel very, very similar to the Love 40 thing that, funnily enough, was also on the serve of Alcaraz, because of course that was Love 40 on Nadal. So number 3 is AO 2012, longest match of all time, Djokovic beating Nadal. 1980, number 2, Borg McEnroe, and 2008 Nadal, Federer, and all that. Our first 2 are exactly the same, but I will go in reverse order. Sorry, with you. I've got you at 7 of 2022 Australian Open men's final, 2017 Australian Open men's final, 2012 Australian Open men's final at number 5. You've got Sinner Alcaraz nicely nestled in there at 4, before then going to Wimbledon 2019 at 3, before we have the same for our top 2 of Wimbledon 1980, but number 1, Wimbledon men's final 2008. So that's where we're placing Sinner Alcaraz in the pantheon. I think some might disagree by 1 or 2 placings, but yeah, I think most of us are having it in that sort of 3, 4, 5 conversation of men's singles finals of all time.
Yeah, listen, that's where I believe it belongs. I would understand those critics who actually made the case for this being number 1. I can't do it myself.
Okay.
But I would respect that point of view, given what they produced that day on such a big occasion. And again, the common thread, I think, in most of these matches, John, that I think is an important part of the criteria. You want to see a good chunk of the best tennis played in the match be in the latter stages. That's, to me, what makes it all gel. In other words, that we discussed the ones where that didn't happen, like the 09 Australia or the 07 Wimbledon. You don't want to see a runaway 5th set if it can be avoided. But in the case of Borg McEnroe, the best tennis was the tiebreaker in the 4th, and then a very close 5th, and we could take it in each and every instance. But Sinner Alcaraz, I mean, to have the last 2 sets, a triple match point recovery, and then eventually a tiebreak victory for a Carlos, and then another tiebreak in the 5th after the set changed course twice. So I think that, to me, really adds to the luster of these matches if they can produce their finest tennis in the latter stages, and particularly in the fifth set.
I have 4 words that I'm sort of going to finish on that all of these finals, I think, do have in common for one reason or another. And that is took the breath away. You know, they're just, you're watching it and your heart is in your mouth and it's gasping either at the points or the magnitude of the occasion or the comeback or the, you know, your heart in the mouth, because we're talking about millimeters from victory or defeat. And I think they all have that in common. And that's why Sinner Alcaraz definitely is in the conversation. And as I say, I think it's difficult to place it much lower than 5 and probably much higher than 3, but it's somewhere in and around there. And I've gone for 5, you've gone for 4. And I think we'll sort of meet in the middle of calling it the 4.5 best match of all time or something like that.
Yeah, that, of course, again, that's, as I said at the outset, when I look at all the matches, and I did that in the book, and there are some exceptions because there's Davis Cup and then something like Labor Roosevelt in Dallas, because Dallas at the time was so important in terms of the men's game. So we're talking just Grand Slam finals. I think that simplifies the discussion, and I think on that basis, that's how I come down.
Yeah. Wonderful, Steve. I think we went into a 5th set and maybe even a 5th set tiebreak at times during this conversation. That, of course,
maybe even a long. Maybe I think we had a 12-10 breaker in the 5th.
I think we might well have done, Steve. Yeah, I'll let our audience decide on who won that 12-10 and let us know in the comments below. But thanks, Steve, once again.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed it. Time went by very, very quickly.
Great, just like it did in that epic match that we saw just 10 days ago in so many ways. Even though it was well over 5 hours, that Sinner Alcaraz match, it did sort of fly by, and so much so I'd even forgotten that Alcaraz was serving for the match in the 5th, which is just wild, which maybe I should be putting it at 3 on my list, but there we go. All right, wonderful, Steve. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.